Yeah, thank y'all for joining us for our first Theory Thursday of the year. It's packed in here. Let's go. My name's Akun Dayo. I am Black Men Bill's Director of Political Education and Culture. I have my comrade Lorik with me and Eugene. And again, welcome to the first Theory Thursday of the year, where we will be discussing uh, what is Pan-Africanism, and what does socialism have to do with Black liberation. Um, and so we are really super excited to journey with you today on this subject. We got a packed agenda, and so I'm gonna go ahead and move us into it. So so what we doing today? We will first, and if you've been with us before, welcome back. Um, and this is your first time, thank you for joining us, and hopefully it won't be your last. Hopefully, you will learn a lot today, but also engage with us deeply, and hopefully even offline, right? You'll start to build with us as well if you're not familiar with Black Men Build. But first, we're gonna get grounded um, with our values and our definitions of power. We'll recap a bit of where we've been, and we'll talk about the road of ideology, and then we will get into the differences between the utopia and what is scientific. Within that, we will also lay out what is Pan-Africanism, what is socialism. And then our comrade Eugene, we will let him cook. And if you ever uh, have heard Eugene or read his work, you know that he cooks with all the ingredients, but he makes quite a delicious meal of education. So he'll be focusing on the trajectory of Black socialism in the U.S. He'll also talk about the Black scare, Red scare, the anti-communism that exists within Black liberation, and then we'll close out from there. A few things. If you are used to if you are used to coming to Theory Thursday, we usually do Zoom format. Today we are in a webinar format. And so if you, so that, so, and which means, using the chat is vital, right? Being in conversation in the chat is vital. You will need to use the raise your hand function. Um, Excuse me, you will need to use the raise your hand function to speak. And so we will have some interactive activities throughout as well. And also we got a lot of slides. And so if folks want to read, Lorik will ask you if somebody want to read a slide, feel free to come off, raise your hand so we can, bring you off mute so you can talk and share and read. And then lastly, we do have what we're doing differently this year. Every Theory Thursday, we will have a study guide. So we'll be sharing in the chat the study guide um, very soon. Okay. Starting with our values pledge. First, we are critical thinkers. We are curious about this moment. We are coming together to take an active and responsible role in freeing our communities. We're transforming to meet the moment, and we are bonded with Black women and all Black people in the fight for true freedom. Um, Black people who choose to fight for the enemy or use our struggle for personal and financial benefit need not apply. If you haven't signed the values pledge, it is there. So if you got, I'll give you 5 seconds to pull out your phone and use the QR code. You can always just go to our website to sign the values pledge as well. So what is power? Power is we define it in two different well, we utilize two different definitions of what we mean as as our foundation of our organizing around power. Some understand power is organized people, organized resources. So we like to use these two different definitions. One from Martin Luther King in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Now, power properly understood, is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. The second definition that we utilize often is Huey P. Newton's from Black Capitalism Reanalyzed. Um, and it says, to us, power is first of all the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired manner. We have additional definitions of power as well that we utilize from comrades like Max Ramo, that we can share in the chat a little later. So where we've been, Theory Thursday is a monthly program. It is a monthly political education program, and these are some of the places we've been last year. Some of the coverage, some of the political and popular education we covered last year. These are all can be seen on our YouTube page. We have almost all of our mass calls, almost all of our Theory Thursdays recorded, and they're here for additional utilization, whether for your own personal benefit or for your collective benefit with any organization you're with to continue your learning. And so these are some of the topics from last year. We'll talk about at the end of today's program what our focus will be this year with our Theory Thursday and Mass Call program. So learning objectives, right? Why are we here today? Obviously, right, we're here to talk about Pan-Africanism and socialism, not as just an intellectual exercise, right? But we know that learning is foundational, and education is foundational towards our liberation and in the pursuit of our revolution. Um, Education is also right what we is what we call, and not just me, right, or us as Black men build, but praxis, right, where we combine theory and practice, right, to meet our objectives. So today, we will study the role and development of ideology. We will practice identifying how ideology shapes activity. We'll assess various examples of socialism and Pan-Africanism. And then obviously we'll repeat the best practices of collective study, right? And so again, online, doing this work online, whether you're organizing online or you're engaged in education online or political education online, is only as good as what you do offline, right? This is just a moment of some deep study, collective study. But again, this is only beneficial if we put it into practice, and that means what we do offline. So I'll want to start with first just a question that will guide us um, throughout these next 90 minutes or so. And again, I would like for folks to raise their hand function. The question is, how does culture reflect your beliefs? And I'll take a few folks. Okay, so we have Adonis first. Okay, go ahead, Adonis Hakeem.
Okay, I can speak. Is it cool?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So I'm not gonna lie. Currently, like especially in more recent times, culture has caused me to reflect on just how much the discoveries I make that impact my beliefs will play a role in how much I could show up for community. I know that sounds a little wordy, but I don't want to get too deep into it. But basically, as far as like religion is concerned, like how that play a role in culture, um, I saw somebody in the comments or whatever you want to call this in the chat recently said that they came here because of FD signifier, and I did too. And I recently heard him say something that basically said that I don't know if I'm quoting him correctly, but he said something like the more the more revolutionary you are, the less people centered it could be. And if I'm misquoting him, y'all get in here. You feel me? Correct me if y'all perceive what he was saying differently, but definitely a lot of the things that we perceive as culture that keep us together, like religion, that's some of the things that honestly, based on what I know about myself and my history and as our people, like the history we have as a people, I know that you know, that definitely has an impact on our ability to be free from a lot of these systems. Like for example, patriarchy. Like, are you really fighting patriarchy if you praying to a patriarch? just because you know that's the culture or whatever. And I'm gonna stop there because I feel like I'm gonna probably go on a tangent.
No, you good. You good. That was the right amount of time, about 90 seconds. Thank you for that offering. It's complex, and I appreciate you bringing starting with the complexity. Um, I will pass to, so thank you, Adonis. I will pass to Tomas Hill. Let me go ahead and get you going. There you go.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, you got an echo, but let's see how it goes.
All right, sorry about that. I'll try and keep it short. Uh, I think culture reflects a lot of beliefs. The biggest thing I think about is like the idea of collectivism versus individualism, and how culturally you can view people in your community, people that aren't just like blood related, as a deep family and a personal connection.
Right on. Thank you for sharing, Tomas. I'll go ahead and pass to, we got a few here. I'm gonna pass to Gabriel, and then on stack will be Koku, and then Joey.
Peace, can y'all hear me?
Indeed.
Yes, sir. So, if culture is how a people connect to each other, and that connection is established based on the environment, history, I think that our beliefs, or at least my beliefs, tend to be a reflection of the systems I was raised in. And not just systems, because I think culture goes beyond system. I think culture functions within movement. So I think that my beliefs are a byproduct of the movement, but I think that beliefs are kind of a starting point. I think beliefs are almost like your initiation into understanding, and the goal should be to like transfer into understanding the more that you mature. So I feel like culture kind of starts off as the blueprint and the map for what life could be, but it doesn't always dictate what life should be, and that's why your beliefs often require a level of challenging, as the brother before me was mentioning. When it comes to investing in things like the system of patriarchy, you could be raised in a culture that embraces that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that should be your beliefs if you don't explore it. So I think that belief should be the portal to understanding, but to transfer to understanding, you need a level of investigation, and sometimes that's difficult when also our culture is counterintuitive towards learning and growth. So that's all my thoughts. I appreciate y'all.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Your answer, your response reminds me of in Wretched of the Earth. There's a chapter by Frantz Fanon called National Culture. And he basically lays out, the stages of how to build how national culture is built by struggle, not necessarily digging into the past or trying to relive the past, but recovering the past. But particularly is developed by the masses who are engaged in struggle. And again, this is in a smaller country within, his analysis compared to the United States, which is again a different era, a different time period, a different group of people. But it does your answer kind of reminds me of that. We'll go Koku and then Joey.
Hey, y'all, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I think it's interesting because culture is a static option and beliefs are malleable. And depending on how you maneuver through your cultures, if you have varying ones, it could change your beliefs. Me personally, I'm from West African descent. My parents are from Ghana. I'm first generation, but I was raised very Americanized. So my culture is kind of like battling those two ideologies, some of the things that my parents brought from Ghana and the way I was raised here. So My beliefs are malleable depending on like the culture I've been invested in, and in some ways that's helped me. In the past, definitely adhered me to some negative ideologies, but as I've switched my culture and people around, I've changed my beliefs as well.
Right on. Yeah, I hear that. And peace, Koku. What's good?
So what's up? What's up? How you feeling?
Good family. Yeah, thank you for that offering. I mean, yeah, right. You're speaking to the fact that, I mean, similarly, right. I'm technically first generation West African from Nigeria. Shout out to any Naji people on the call from Ijiba. And yeah, right. There's a colliding in a beautiful way, and there's a colliding in a way that is facilitated by white supremacy, patriarchy, right, and capitalism. Um, and so, right, culture is it's a plural, right? It's not, it's culture is really, but how are we thinking about our culture as it relates to our beliefs? I'll take one more, which is Joey. And I think we might need to move on, but I'm gonna check with my squad. So let me see. Seem like Joey. Oh, I think I might have lost you. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yep. Hello.
There you go. We can hear you.
All right. I was actually gonna say something that the former brother just, not former, he's not dead, but the last brother just said, uh, how our beliefs are reflective of the culture that we come up in. Because like growing up, I was like, like you can hear it in my voice. I come from like African community, and growing up, it was sort of like always. My culture always reflected that we are different from Black Americans. And like growing up, I'm like in my mid late 20s now. No, the heck we aren't. So
Indeed.
I think that our beliefs evolve from our culture, and they evolve to reflect the person that we are and the community that we grow up in, as opposed to like us staying stagnant within our culture.
Hmm.
You know
Indeed.
what I mean?
Indeed. Yeah, yeah. Culture is a living, breathing, always morphing, right? Always evolving uh thing, right? And so yeah, thank you for that offering. I'm gonna pause us there. And so for anybody else that had their hand up, I'm gonna pause us at that moment and keep us moving. There will be other opportunities to come off mute and raise your hand and share your wisdom, share your experience. Um, so uh I'm gonna bring up uh my comrade Lorik to move us on. Right. Anything you want to say on that first?
On what? I'm sorry.
No, you got it. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, cool. Peace, everyone. I'm Lord. I'm the political education chair for BNB Miami, and also a student of Pan-Africanism and Socialism. So here today to learn with y'all and dial and just led a great conversation around African culture and somebody who really examined that according to both the Pan-Africanist and a socialist lens is our ancestor Walter Rodney. Black Men Build engaged in some study of Walter Rodney last year, engaging in groundings, and also some work with our comrade Dwayne Omawale Wong. Are you done with your meeting? Check out our mass call on that subject. Among the principles of African culture, the following are to be noted: hospitality, respect, especially the elders, importance of the woman, especially in cases of inheritance, humane treatment of lawbreakers, spiritual reflection, common use of the land, constant employment of music, especially drums, and bright colors. Now, of course, wherever you are in the diaspora, you might notice that these things are present in how we live. And that's because, as Rodney explains, a culture is a total way of life. It embraces what people ate and what they wore, the way they talked and the way walked and the way they talked, the manner in which they treated death and greeted the newborn. And so we understand this. Now, this isn't a mystical connection between us all, right? This is actually something that is rooted in our experiences in the material world, how we greet each other each day, as he says, how we mourn, and how we build together. Now, some of these principles are found in many different human societies. So this is not also saying that this is only exclusive to African people, but we know everyone wants to be invited to the cookout. And so what we're trying to say here is that regardless of if they're exclusive to us, they can be found on our mother continent and throughout the diaspora. But very few, regardless of where you are in the world, are encouraged in the present white capitalist colonial hellscape that we live in. Next slide, please. Now, we talked a lot about culture. I heard a lot of different approaches and then a lot of unity in these approaches. And so culture, again, is a reflection of a total way of life. And so there are a lot of questions that culture somewhat answers, right? But we're focused on a core two. One, how does the society produce what its people need to survive? And then two, how are these resources distributed? Now, if we were to just focus on the level of culture, we would see that answers to these can be expressed by culture. But ultimately, it's shaped by ideology. And so today, what we want to explore is ideology. Everybody has one. Okay, next slide, please. Now, usually it's a little more interactive. If you keep coming to Theory Thursdays, you'll see we tend to have breakout rooms and things like that. But right now, I'll be doing a lot of reading, and then we'll have some games, some ways for y'all to interact a bit later. But I love to have people come off mute and join me in these readings. So if anything resonates, please share in the chat, add more information, what have you. So what is ideology? Well, this is from Sister Shana Maglan in the Vita Wawatu, which is a New African Prisoner of War journal. These are political prisoners, our folks behind the wall, and some of the sharpest and most brilliant scholarship we have. From there, she says, it is a set of principles drawn from the historical experience of a given people to explain the causes of their past situation and their present situation and the ways and means to bring about a future situation consistent with their desire of an independent and free existence. Now, again, ideologies are something everyone can have. Ideologies can have a revolutionary or a reactionary aim. They can be for oppression or liberation from oppression. Now, where do ideological principles come from? Well, they come about through research. Once you've done enough research and correctly put together these ideas into a coherent whole, they are a guide for action. And so briefly, an ideology is a set of principles drawn from the historical experience of a particular people, submitted to the same general social, economic, and cultural realities in a common historical situation. As such, it provides the guidelines for action or change in the direction desired by that people. Next slide, please. And so we began with grounding ourselves in our tradition, in power, and collective study and in community. But we, again, want to be clear that there are other ideologies out there. They are not all created equal, and they do not all serve the same ends. And so to be clear on the ideologies that we're studying tonight, we want to begin with Secretary of State Marco Rubio's Munich Security Conference address. This will be our explanation of the colonizer's ideology.
Let's make sure we can hear this. So I'm gonna test it first.
President Trump, the United States.
We good? Okay.
Wait, we lost it. You had it and then it went away. Okay.
Driven by a vision of a future as proud, as sovereign, and as vital as our civilization's past. And while we are prepared, if necessary, to do this alone, it is our preference and it is our hope to do this together with you, our friends here in Europe. For the United States and Europe, we belong together. America was founded 250 years ago, but the roots began here on this continent long before. The men who settled and built the nation of my birth arrived on our shores carrying the memories and the traditions and the Christian faith of their ancestors as a sacred inheritance, an unbreakable link between the old world and the new. We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds that nations could share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, ancestry, and the sacrifices our forefathers made together for the common civilization to which we have fallen heir. And so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe. The reason why, my friends, is because we care deeply. We care deeply about your future and ours. And if at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know that the fate of Europe will never be irrelevant to our own.
So we hope that was clear. He goes on to talk about who his ancestors are, the Scots-Irish frontiersmen who murdered natives, the Spanish and Italian explorers who also murdered natives, and all while enslaving our people. But we'll get to that. So now that we have this clarity around ideology, I want us to collectively engage in the ancient African proverb, who is we? Who's we? Who is we here? I don't understand who is we, because nobody in the African world is being addressed. And so next slide, please. We want to be clear on this ideology, its definition, and who it's for. Although Marco Rubio made it very, very clear in that statement. He's referring to himself as a USian, someone from the good old USA and all of Europe. All of these countries, collectively defined as the West, engage in colonialism. So it's very important that we get that definition. Now, a common one is the conquest and direct control of other people's land. But there's more. It's a particular phase in the history of imperialism. Now, you'll often see these words, colonialism and imperialism, for all intents and purposes, they're interchangeable. Latin, imperium, meaning to command or rule, and ism, a condition, state, disease, or process. To command or rule, imperium then is turned into empire. And so a literal translation of imperialism is the process of empire building. But we can now understand it best as the globalization of the capitalist mode of production, its penetration of previously non-capitalist regions of the world, and destruction of pre- or non-capitalist forms of social organization. So it's very important to understand this definition of imperialism and colonialism. Next slide, please. This will be a bit of review, so we'll be moving through it quickly. Again, as Dio told you, please check out our previous Theory Thursdays where we've covered this in detail. But for those of you who have been here before, please enjoy this review. When we say the modern world, what are we talking about? What was the core foundation, the thing, the soil from which this culture grew? Well, first and foremost, we have Euro-Christian colonizer empire building. But this is in a relationship, what we call a dialectic with other things. This is only possible in relationship to Native American land theft and genocide and African chattel slavery and genocide. And so that is our foundation of the modern world. When Rubio is talking about this great thing he is trying to rebuild, that is what he is talking about. If you don't believe me, look at the tattoo of our current Secretary of Defense with his Crusader cross across his chest. Next slide, please. We just address this myth very often, which is that if you look at the maps and you look at the numbers, you'll see that the US got very few slaves. That's because they were late to the game. They were British. George Washington was British for the first half of his life. The new Americans did receive a small number of enslaved Africans. However, they developed a domestic slave trade by forcibly breeding hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans, which is how we get from 400,000 to approximately 4 million at the time of the Civil War. But what's very important to understand here in our relationship between Pan-Africanism and socialism is that the wealth generated from enslaved labor was foundational to the European world and its dominance. In the US, by 1860, enslaved people were valued at approximately $3 billion, making them the nation's largest financial asset at the time. Next slide, please. More information about that, some old statistics about the myth of the prostrate South. In fact, they were selling to Europeans, again, engaging in capitalism across seas. And their market value in 1860 of just the 5 states was 1.6 billion at the time, where that GDP in total was 4.3 billion. Next slide, please. Of course, we didn't take this lying down, and so we have a tradition of resistance beginning as soon as the Spanish explorers settled here. So last year, of course, we talked about the first enslaved Africans arriving in La Florida. Within a month, the enslaved natives and Africans revolted, initiating what would become a revolutionary tradition, burning down the homes of their enslavers and escaping to live off the land and join native societies, something called a marronage, and we know them as the Maroons. Next slide, please. And so we know we're building from this tradition. And as time progressed, as capitalism developed, we saw 2 ideologies emerge in direct response. As we said earlier, it's a relationship. And so in dialectical opposition to imperialism, to communism, we see imperialism, and colonialism. We see Pan-Africanism and communism emerge. And so in this special interview with Professor Hakeem Adi, a British professor of history who actually lost his post, most likely due to this work, we want to hear about that relationship real briefly.
Presented in such a way that it would appear that there is a division or a difference between these 2 movements. But Pan-Africanism is concerned with the unity and liberation of Africa and its diaspora. Communism is concerned with the liberation of the workers, the toilers of all countries. And so there's a clear interconnection between the 2. And particularly in the early 20th century, when many people from the African diaspora in the US and the Caribbean, as well as in Africa, were looking to find ways of affecting their liberation. They were greatly inspired by the communist movement, and particularly by the events that had taken place in Russia, then the Soviet.
So we want to remember this relationship, how it emerges in response to colonialism and imperialism. And 2 thinkers who we will explore tonight were W.E.B. Du Bois in 1915 with The African Roots of War, and Vladimir Lenin in 1917 writing Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Both these people arriving at similar conclusions, though from different positions in the world. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass it back to my brother Dio so we can get clear on definitions. We just got our clear definition of colonialism and the colonizer's ideology. And so we want to be clear on how we're defining Pan-Africanism and socialism.
Thank you, Lord. So we are utilizing for, I think what we believe is the most comprehensive definition of Pan-Africanism, which is also Brother Hakeem that we just saw in the video, what also has demonstrated is kind of the most, most comprehensive definition from the African Union, the AU. So it says an ideology and movement that encourages the solidarity of Africans worldwide. It is based on the belief that unity is vital to economic, social, and political progress and aims to unify and uplift people of African descent. The ideology asserts that the fates of all African people and countries are intertwined. At its core, it's a belief that African peoples, both on the continent and in the diaspora, share not merely a common history, but a common destiny. This definition, though developed through the AU with support of Nelson Mandela in the early 60s, 1960s. We want to be clear, right, that the development of Pan-Africanism goes all the way back to the 19th century, in which we won't go that far back in history. This is, to talk, about Pan-Africanism. We will share some resources if folks want to take a deep dive. Particularly, you can just look at Hakeem Adi's book, The History of Pan-Africanism. But we believe that this is the most well-rounded definition thus far. And so to continue understanding, how these definitions have been defined, how Pan-Africanism has been defined as a praxis, right? Not just, again, being clear that it is an ideology, it's also a movement where theory and practice meet. First, we have Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, right? How many of y'all, maybe in the chat, right? How many are familiar with the great Dr. Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana? Yes, Martin Delany, right? When we're talking about going back to the 19th century. Yes, indeed. Yes, yes. Cool. So with these particular Pan-Africanist profiles, I'm gonna just share actually from their own words, right? So Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, right? For those that are familiar, right? The total was clear that the total liberation and unification of Africa under an all-African socialist, particularly a scientific socialist government, as the only way to defeat neo-colonialism and to achieve independence. That's one. Two, he said, "The divided we are weak. United, Africa becomes one of the greatest forces for good in the world." Emphasis on good in the world. I think it would be clear, right, that a lot of Pan-Africanist struggle wasn't only about Pan-Africanism, but in solidarity with people because of the clear anti-colonial, anti-imperialist objectives of Pan-Africanism. So you will see, right, African nations throughout the diaspora, movements throughout the diaspora, throughout the world, that are African-led, that have aspirations of either a Pan-Africanist or a socialist project, are also aligned in relationship, right, in Latin America, throughout the Americas period, right, throughout the Caribbean, throughout Asia, etc. Right. Lastly, another quote here from Dr. Kwame Nkrumah: "All people of African descent, whether they live in North or South America, the Caribbean, or any part of the world, are Africans and belong to the African nation." Right. Again, right, this sense of unity, not just sense, but this dedication to be unified and struggle, which is also going back to the question of culture. Right. And then lastly, "The forces that unite us are intrinsic and greater than the superimposed influences that keep us apart." Right. Being clear that we share a common destiny, right, which is often shared language that of Pan-Africanism. Next is Dr. Walter Rodney, and I'm pulling from, and this is also Patricia Rodney as well, right, his wife and comrade in struggle. And so I'm pulling from a speech on African Liberation Day in the 70s, where Walter Rodney gave a speech at this event. So a few quotes here: Any pan concept is an exercise in self-definition by a people aimed at establishing a broader redefinition of themselves than that which has so far been permitted by those in power. The support of Africa is merely an extension from the struggle here in the Americas." At this time, he was a guest speaker. He was in North America. The struggle is universal because the system of oppression is universal. Lastly, he says, it is an affirmation that we are saying yes to the line, which was developed by people like Marcus Garvey, W.B. Du Bois, George Padmere, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Frantz Fanon. We are saying yes to the struggle in Africa today, which is led by such giants as Sekou Touré, Julius Nyerere, and we are saying yes to people like the Soledad brothers and the martyrs of Attica, right? He's connecting, right, imprisoned intellectuals, captives. He's including, right, revolutionaries behind the wall, and he's tying it to heads of state, right, like Patrice Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah, right? Lastly, we have Tatina. Okay, here we go. Last, we have Tatina Sila of the African Party for the Liberation of Guinea and Cape Verde. And I'm pulling some pieces from their party program. Tatina Sila was one of the first revolutionaries. I believe she was 17 when she joined the party. She joined the liberation struggle as one of the first women. She was trained as a nurse in the Soviet Union, and she was one of the first soldiers and one of the nurses that led leadership within the party early on. So I'm gonna pull some things from the party program, right? Also, African Party is in the name, which is tied, meaning that their liberation in Guinea and Cape Verde is tied up with the liberation of all of Africa. So here it says, after winning of our national independence and on the basis of freely manifested popular will to struggles for the unity of African peoples as a whole or by regions of the continent, always respecting the freedom, dignity, and the right of political, economic, social, and cultural progress of these peoples, right? So even though they understand that they are fighting for their own liberation, they know that their liberation is tied up with Africans around the world. Here it says, defense of the political, economic, and social, cultural rights and gains of the popular masses of Guinea and Cape Verde Islands is a fundamental condition for the realization of unity with other African peoples, right? Lastly, proper international policy in its interest of the nation of Africa and of the peace and progress of humanity, peaceful collaboration with all the peoples of the world. Again, right? Pan-Africanism is also a project of solidarity of non-African peoples. The peaceful collaboration with all the peoples of the world on the basis of principles of mutual respect, national sovereignty, territorial integrity, non-aggression, and non-interference in internal affairs equally, and reciprocity of advantages and peaceful coexistence, right? So these are three, again, examples and definitions, and it's important to highlight that these definitions are grounded, right, in actual struggle, right? Not just academically, not just intellectually, right? But actual struggle itself. All right, I'll pass
Thank
to
you. Thank you, Brother Dial. Absolutely. So hopefully we are clear on what Pan-Africanism is. Again, we're going to talk about, even if people somewhat agree on the definition, what is the message, and method that they espouse and that they follow, right? So we're going to move on to defining socialism. There are some definitions which, again, are meant to be taken up by the masses because they really do get to the essence of what it is. So we're going to start with those, and we're also going to point out that there are more criteria than just these, even if they are the core idea. But that's always the problem with definitions, right? So I don't know if we mentioned the UNIA and Garvey yet. We did have the red, black, and green. And so that is what comes out of that tradition. And someone who actually studied under Garvey, interestingly enough, during his time in the US was Ho Chi Minh, someone affectionately known as Uncle Ho, Vietnamese revolutionary. And he said, socialism is a society which continually enhances the physical and spiritual life of the people, foremost the workers. Now, Ho Chi Minh was a socialist, a communist of the variety known as Marxist-Leninist. And again, we don't have time to get into all those distinctions here, but we want to point out that even if you are from a different tendency, there tends to be a certain agreement. And so we want to also highlight our ancestor, Afro-Cuban anarchist, Rafael Serra. Socialism means that every human being, by virtue of being born, acquires the right to life, well-being, and culture without distinction of class, race, and nationality. So when we get those core definitions, regardless of your tendency that people agree on, we also want to get those core components. And so we understand that socialism also means worker control of the means of production of toilers of the earth, what Fanon calls the wretched of the earth, and social institutions through class struggle, or as the Panthers summarized it, power to the people. Now, we want to understand that socialism is a lower form of communism, as Haki Adi did not necessarily distinguish between the two. Communism can be understood in some senses as a planned economy on the basis of common ownership without any class division. It also sounds a bit like a utopia. We'll get into that later. But purely, it's defined as a stateless, classless, and moneyless society with communal ownership of land and other means of production, as well as collective, planned, democratic distribution of resources, summarized by the maxim, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Next slide, please. Now, again, we don't want this to be some pie in the sky utopia, right? Because people have already been building this for a century at this point, if not longer. And we have examples in a tradition that we draw from. So the first example we want to talk about, we're going to talk about all elements of the diaspora. I saw someone mention that earlier. Pan-Africanism and socialism have been practiced by all corners of the diaspora and on the continent. And so we're going to start in the good old USA with Angelo Herndon, one of the first political prisoners. And we talk about that in Black Men Build and support them as well. What made him this way? Well, he was born in extreme poverty in Ohio. He was a child laborer in a Kentucky coal mine from the age of 14, where he saw his father and many others get horrible conditions that resulted in debilitation or death. He joined the Communist Party in 1930 and became a labor organizer in the Deep South. He built an integrated unemployment council in Atlanta and demanded relief during the Great Depression. Then he was arrested in 1932 for possessing communist literature, and it led to the landmark U.S. Supreme Court case, which struck down Georgia's insurrection laws unconstitutional. He founded the Negro Publication Society and published the newspaper The People's Advocate. And his brother Milton died fighting fascism in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade during the Spanish Civil War. And so that is one of our early examples of communism, someone toiling as a child laborer, as a slave in the coal mines, joining the Communist Party and fighting for liberation. Next, please. So we shout out and salute our ancestor, Angelo Herndon. Coming from the Caribbean, from Trinidad, we have ancestor Claudia Jones. Born in Trinidad, but shout out the USA, shout out Harlem. She immigrated to Harlem as a child. Now, never shout out the USA, but we know what we mean when we say that. Our neighborhoods. Her mother died from the exhaustion of factory labor combined with caring for her family, witnessed firsthand the super exploitation of Black women workers. She was a brilliant organizer and theoretician for the Communist Party USA. Developed concept of triple oppression to describe Black women's position at the intersection of race, class, and gender under imperialism. On top of that, making the Communist Party USA stick to its principles, fight oppression of the Negro, fight lynching. And so her and ancestors like Queen Mother Moore were engaged in making sure the Communist Party stood up against wrongful incarceration of our brothers. She was imprisoned herself, though, and targeted under the McCarthy-era Smith Act, and then deported to the UK. They said she couldn't go back to her motherland in Trinidad even, because she would be too radical and too effective at organizing our people. So they shipped her to the UK. She founded the West Indian Gazette, Britain's first major Black newspaper, because the white cracker communists would not work with her. She helped establish a celebration that became the Notting Hill Carnival as an act of Black political and cultural resistance. And I think we're celebrating Carnival right around now. So we want to shout out our ancestor, Claudia Jones. And one more. Ancestor Steve Biko in Azania, also known as South Africa, from 1946 to 1977, a short life. He was born in Ginsburg Township, Eastern Cape. He was watching his mother, a domestic worker, deal with grueling labor under apartheid, similar to how many of our folks watched our ancestors under grueling labor in Jim Crow. As a medical student, he co-founded SASO and developed a Black consciousness movement to psychologically liberate Black people and build grassroots power. His organization, the BPC, embraced scientific socialism and explained apartheid as racialized capitalism, actually one of the struggles where we get the term racial capitalism from. So it's always important to remember origins and traditions. He explained that with Black consciousness came socialist economics. They needed collective ownership of South Africa's wealth, the diamond mines which fuel the Israeli economy. He was brutally tortured and murdered by apartheid security forces in 1977, and he became a global martyr that, of course, linked the struggles between racism and capitalism, or in our case, socialism and Pan-Africanism. Shout out, ancestor Steve Biko. So we are doing great on time, Dio. We're about to jump into this game called Utopian versus Scientific. So again, you all got to see some real life revolutionaries and what they did, right? How they produced struggle. But we want to understand that there's a lot of people who will say that they align with these definitions, who will say that they agree with these things to an extent. But we want to be able to discern how serious they are. What is their method for achieving this world that we want to build? How do they get power? And so, in this context, what is utopian? It doesn't necessarily mean a perfect imaginary place, although, again, some people think of it that way. But it describes a form of magical thinking, what we sometimes call idealism, right? Doesn't mean you're just idealistic and have these values that are, love and peace and all of that. It's more about you make plans and don't really have a way to get there. So here's an idea. Brilliant thinker imagines a perfect society based on their ideas of justice, reason, and morality. Sounds very European. Sounds very colonial. But why does it fail? Well, sometimes these plans ignore material conditions, things like current technology, systems, the real needs and conflicts of people. As Engels noted, who we'll be pulling from for this distinction, utopians believe the solution of the social problems to come out of the mind, out of the human brain, and be presented all at once. If you have the perfect answers, the most logical, objective reasoning, right, then you figured it all out. But they lack a practical understanding of how society actually works and how change actually happens. They appeal to reason, but then couldn't show a real path forward. So we're going to get into some examples. If you have some examples that just come to your head off top, please drop them in the chat, but we will have some more. So we want to understand what utopian means in this context. You got this great idea, all the perfect answers, but no plan, no way to actually deal with struggle, no evaluation of how the world actually is around you. Next slide. Now, we can admire that people have a utopian understanding and they want, again, peace and love and happiness, right? But what do we mean when we say we want a scientific understanding? What does it mean to be scientific? Now, it doesn't just mean being in a lab coat, having test tubes, doing experiments, although that is a part of it. We don't deny that. We also don't say that that's only a European practice. In fact, we know that African, Asian, indigenous peoples around the world have been practicing sciences in their societies as well. But we talked about our first value. In this case, scientific means critical thinking and building on reality. It's a way of thinking everyone can use. So if you align with our values, as you did at the beginning, you're already on the right track. Now, what happens? Well, you have to observe the world as it is. You actually have to understand its problems, its history, and its material conditions. You can't have magical thinking. You have to look for real forces that are already moving. Then you have to base your plans for change on this evidence that's always changing, evidence that you have to get collectively, communally, and study, and things like this. A scientific approach understands that change isn't about one perfect plan, but about understanding the real conflicts and possibilities within the society and working with them. It's about finding the path forward, rooted in what exists, not just what should be. Next slide, please. I see someone's done their homework already in the chat. I see you. Okay, now, we, again, want to give some clear examples. So we've talked about utopias. We're going to ask y'all, does this sound more utopian, more scientific? And we'll have a little bit of debate, and that's okay. But we want to be clear on what are some examples historically of scientific Pan-Africanism and scientific socialism. So we're going to return to Professor Adi and this interview on Telesur, because I know someone asked about that earlier.
You about the particular significance that the countries in this region, from the Caribbean and also other regions from South America, like Brazil, for example, what can you tell us about the importance that this region of the world has played in the broader picture, the broader history of Pan-Africanism?
Well, particularly from the Caribbean, countries such as Haiti, which is in the news at the moment, played a very important part in the development of Pan-Africanism. We could say that the Haitian Revolution itself was a Pan-African act, in the sense that Africans from many parts of the continent who had been kidnapped, enslaved, taken to the Caribbean, organized themselves, spoke different languages, but came together in unity to overthrow the entire slave system, to defeat the armies of Britain, France, Spain, and so on, liberate themselves, and then create a haven for other Africans and a symbol of the independence of all Africans, a symbol of African liberation, African freedom. So countries like Haiti have played a very important role, and then people from the countries of the Caribbean and Latin America have also played a very important role in the development of Pan-Africanism. For example, somebody like Marcus Garvey in the 1920s played an important role. And there have been many others drawn from this region, from the American continent, as well as Africa and other parts. They said to themselves, if the people of Russia, the ordinary workers and farmers of Russia, can liberate themselves, then this has got to be a good thing for us. And perhaps we can liberate ourselves by following a similar example. And of course, they were encouraged and inspired by the creation of the communist movement, the Communist International, which then tried to assist and intervene in those struggles in Africa, the Caribbean, and other places, and encourage that unity and encourage people to struggle for their liberation, but in collaboration with the struggles of people of all countries. So I think that's the connection between the two movements.
And do you believe that, can we think Pan-Africanism as being inherently anti-imperialist, or are there different ways of approaching, or have there been different ways of approaching the idea of Pan-Africanism?
Pan-Africanism is a broad movement. In my book, I say it's like a river with many different streams and currents.
You can stop it there.
That's it.
And so, again, we have some of our examples, starting with some of the more foundational ones. Maybe some of y'all are familiar with it, but it doesn't hurt to review. And for those who are unfamiliar, you have a lot more information to dig into. So, again, what is utopian? What is scientific? Why were the Haitian Revolution and Russian Revolution scientific? Well, Professor Adi explained it to us, right? They dealt with the real world and how to make change in their societies. Next slide, please. So we want to hear from y'all. Now, I think, again, some of our Theory Thursdays coming up the line will probably be more interactive in this way, but we are going to do a poll, and we would have people come off mute to play this game. So this is welcome to Utopian versus Scientific. The goal of the game is to tell the difference between two ways of trying to build a better world. Now, how do you play? On these upcoming slides, you're going to see two images, and we're going to provide some descriptions. Based on the definitions you have seen so far, if you have been paying attention, then you are going to decide which one of the two options is a utopian attempt and which one is a scientific attempt at executing an ideology. And again, we're focused on Pan-Africanism and socialism here. So we're looking at those. Ready to go down?
Yes, let's do it. Just an additional instruction. We're gonna use the chat. So for folks, when we pull up the photos, right? Before we give an answer or we give our analysis, we want to see what y'all think in the chat. And so you can say this is scientific or this was utopian, and then we'll go from there. All right, that sound good, y'all? Are you ready, Lord?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I'm up first. Word. Okay. So let's play utopian versus scientific. And in this case, we got Du Bois versus Du Bois. So which one is a utopian attempt and which one is a scientific attempt? It's going to be some fun. All right. So first of all, let's talk about Du Bois in Liberia. W.E.B. Du Bois, and it's not Du Bois. He spelled it himself. viewed Liberia as a critical symbol of Black sovereignty and potential. However, his involvement with the country involved complex diplomacy and a fierce rivalry with Marcus Garvey. Unlike his contemporary, Elie Garza, Du Bois said nothing about the use of slave labor in the country, instead painting an idealized picture. He claimed Liberia extended her democracy to include natives on the same term as Liberians, and the nation never had a revolution or internal disturbance, save in a rare few cases with the warlike native tribes. He initially supported a 1926 agreement allowing Firestone Tire and Rubber to establish massive rubber plantations. He said that it was a lesser evil than British or French colonialism, all in his attempt, again, to get us back to Africa. So we're talking about Pan-Africanism here. That was one attempt. Let's talk about Du Bois and the Pan-African Congresses. Between 1919 and 1945, Du Bois helped organize and lead 5 Pan-African Congresses that laid the foundation for African decolonization. He drafted a manifesto to the newly formed League of Nations, demanding a person of African descent be on the Mandates Commission and an international section in the Labor Bureau be established to protect Native labor. He authored resolutions calling for Allied administrations to give up their colonies and push for African home rule. He used his position as the editor of the Crisis magazine to publish proceedings and resolutions from the Congresses to a global audience. At the 1945 Congress, Du Bois served as the international president, but he actually intensely stepped back to be a respected figurehead and allow a younger, more militant generation, like we saw earlier with the Sajifo Kwame Nkrumah, take charge and steer the movement forward. The Congress was distinct for its focus on anti-colonial struggle and actual revolution rather than just reforms. So which of these do we think trends more utopian? I know some people are going to like the gray. We do like the gray, but tends more utopian and tends more scientific. And if this feels easy, that's great. We're just starting off. Don't get too much dip on your chip. All right. I'm seeing some things in the chat. Dial, did anyone come off mute? Or sorry, raise their hand?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm going to open it up. Raise your hand if you feel like you can explain which is which.
We got somebody. Let's see. Hold on. Okay, let's go with, because Gabriel, you spoke already, I'm gonna go with Taj Wiggins.
Yeah. So I don't have like the most well thought out like explanation. It's kind of fair, right? But it seems like with the Du Bois and his Pan-African Congress plan, he had a way of kind of using his ideals and guiding principles in a way where you could see him actualize it in a way, I suppose. Like there were existing systems that even if like you fundamentally disagree with the systems, like there are in the end, there are useful ways to interact with them. And it seems like that approach was more geared towards what can I do right now? What's actionable?
Mm.
And just like utilizing what he had in front of him to get things done. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Now, what we think? Is that the right answer?
I think so.
Yes, sir. Well
Yeah.
done, Taj. We appreciate you. That's
Thank you.
absolutely the right answer. The right, in this case, option, Du Bois and the Pan-African Congresses. And as you can see there, there's, of course, Kwame Nkrumah and Du Bois, a bit older, a bit wiser, a bit more Pan-Africanist and communist. But he's also there with Shirley Graham Du Bois, who really informed those politics as well, and also was helpful in organizing Malcolm's trip to Africa. So we want to remember these things. So Du Bois and the Liberia option, right? Like why is that utopian? Well, let's already start with the backwards warlike native tribes, right? So it doesn't actually engage with the Africans in the Pan-Africanism situation. It also engaged with colonialism, just Du Bois as a person from the US determining what the lesser evil is in that region. So in that case, it is very utopian. It didn't consider the class forces at play, which is why Du Bois quickly pulled out of supporting plantations for his people. We know the elders better than that. All right. Next slide, Dial. I think you're up.
Yeah, and just to add, right, W. Du Bois is to remember a big part of our work at Black Men Build is about transformation. And the boy's life, right, living to about 95, or give or take, right, lived a life of transformation. Not in his politics, but his politics is a part of his being, right? Your politics are a part of your being. It's a part of your culture. And as we know, right, W. Du Bois started off as and not in totality, right? I'm not going to flatten the ancestor because, right, he in many ways becomes the genesis of what we know as Black study and Black studies. But a big part of his politics, right, was elitist, right? The talented 10th. And so the previous Pan-African Congresses and the work with Liberia, right, stem from him seeing himself as such, right, as an authority of such to be able to make claim and to be able to lead the people. And so he had to do a lot of a shedding of the white Western gaze, or the white Western institutions and thinking. And over decades, right, he was able to do that. Hence, getting to the place where the Pan African Congress was at Manchester. All right, let's keep it moving. All right. Uh-oh, did we lose Lord? No. Okay, I'll give him some time to come back.
No, you sure did, because I thought I had a second. My bad.
Okay.
My
You got the
slide, my
next. You
slide.
got the next
Yeah,
couple.
yeah, yeah, got it. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Okay, word, word. Well, we got another game, yo, another example. So on the left here, we have Brazil's MST movement, the Movimento dos Trabalhadores Rurais Sem Terra. Yes, my brother speaks Portuguese, not me, so I probably butchered that. But it's translated to the landless workers movement, and it's Latin America's largest social movement fighting for land reform, social justice, and against inequality in Brazil. Founded in 1984, the MST organizes landless peasants to occupy underutilized lands. Having settled over 350,000 families across 17 million acres, the MST organizes landless workers to occupy unused, unproductive land under Article 184 of Brazil's 1988 Constitution, which mandates that land must fulfill a social function. They're not acts of charity, but organized pressure, forcing the state to expropriate and redistribute land through legal channels. The movement has built an entire parallel infrastructure with 1,900 associations, 185 cooperatives, 120 agribusinesses producing food, and helping develop agroecology and sustainable farming as a direct challenge, of course, to corporate-controlled agriculture. So that's our example on the left. On the right, we have Henri de Saint-Simon. He was a French aristocrat. He was a social theorist, so he wrote in the early 19th century, basically. And I believe he was involved in shaping the French Revolution, but he fought alongside American revolutionaries in his youth, and then he devoted his fortune to help develop a new science of society that would reorganize the world after the chaos of revolution and war. So again, he has his ideas. He envisioned a society run by scientists, engineers, and industrialists, the productive class, who would replace parasitic feudal elites and organize things rationally for the benefit of all. He focused on tech and organizational efficiency to end poverty, believing that industrial development itself would naturally bring peace and prosperity. He developed what was known as, well, I can't say that, but he did call on kings and bankers to voluntarily, implement his vision, but never identified who would actually overthrow the old system and replace the current class interest. So between these two options, which one do we think is scientific and which one do we think is utopian? Leah says, white man on the right, utopian. Does anyone want to come off mute to give their reasoning? I'm seeing some people say, probably. Be confident. You got this. Okay.
We
Guy,
do
we got
have,
anybody in the
yes,
lobby?
yes, we have JT. Hold on, JT ran. So I'm gonna
What's up,
take
JT?
you. Hold on, there we go.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Indeed.
sir.
All right, cool. All right. Yeah. So, so the one on the left in Brazil, eh, they're rooted in materialist change and social change that changes the mode of production and exchange, and really uh, centers their community. Whereas our socialist brother on the left is more about philosophy of the mind, and you can tell in particularly with the alignment with the American Revolution, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's more about being materialist in nature.
Absolutely. Well done. Thank you. So that was the answer. The right, in this case, is the utopian version, and the left is the scientific version of attempting socialism. So on the previous slide, we talked about Pan-Africanism. This one was about attempting socialism. And Dejan in the chat said, an early version of a technocrat, huh? The more you know. Yes, absolutely. That is exactly what he's an early version of. His movement was also called technological utopianism. So I almost spoiled it with that. But very good. Did want to create a new science of society, but then the science part kind of got left out. This is a fun one. Okay, Pan-Africanism, utopian versus scientific. On the left, we have Lumumba in the Congo. And on the right, we have Calise, Earn Your Leisure, and Kenya. So which is an example of which? This is easy. Yeah. Okay, so
This is
it's
a
it's
freebie.
happening.
A
It's happening in the
freebie.
real world. So okay. Now, starting with the left, Patrice Lumumba's life and brief leadership as the first prime minister of the independent Democratic Republic of Congo in 1960 defined the continent's struggle for sovereignty. Lumumba was deeply influenced by Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. Ooh, I can't speak today. Sorry. After the 1958 All-African People's Conference, the two signed the secret agreement to work toward a union of African states. He famously argued that political independence was hollow without economic control, and that Congo's vast mineral wealth should benefit its own people rather than foreign corporations. Now, on the right, we have Calise, Earn Your Liberation, and Kenya. In a widely discussed 2025 interview on Earn Your Leisure podcast, musician and entrepreneur Calise detailed her bold decision to relocate her family from California to Kenya to build a massive agricultural empire. Calise initially purchased 150 acres of farmland and has since expanded her vision to cover over 300 acres. She broke down the profitability of farming, noting that with just $11,000 on a 5-acre onion farm, you can make up to $30,000 to $35,000 a quarter. Beyond traditionally farming crops like potatoes and coffee, she's developing a sustainable luxury wellness retreat that will include a fine dining restaurant and bungalows. But with this strain of Pan-Africanism, the We Farms initiative focuses on sustainable irrigation using lake water and local talent to integrate with the existing ecosystem. Let's see some answers in the chat. Which one of these is utopian and which one? Which one? They both might work, right? Yeah. They both got a shot. Yeah. So which one of these approaches more? Oh, both are very scientific. Yes. Thank you, Kenji. Indeed. Although the science of one we might describe as closer to the colonizer's ideology.
We got a hand. Kimberly Miller.
Kim, how you doing?
Hi, I'm really happy to be here tonight and this very educational webinar. So thank you for the invite. And we have some BAP Miami cluster folks on the call as well.
Gang.
Yes. Okay. So I would say definitely that the second, even though I love Khalees, but she is neoliberal and very vague about Pan-Africanism in the sense that it's very ideal sense that kind of disconnects the struggle of African self-determination, of course, Kenyan farmers, indigenous Kenyan farmers being displaced, right? And not looking at the material reality in East Africa, instead kind of like using it to like build her brand. And I think that that's kind of how liberalism essentially uses idealism to get across its message of this kind of like hollow unity. But again, it's not rooted in class struggle. It's not rooted in indigenous autonomy or sovereignty. So that's what stuck out for me. And versus the Lumumba example, who was not a communist, but yet he still was an anti-colonialist. And you could see that the way he's engaging Congolese self-determination is rooted in economic autonomy over their, of course, mineral resources. And we see that that's still plaguing the Congo to this day. So I would say definitely the first is scientific, even if he wasn't a, like I said, traditional Marxist. And then you also have Khalees with the liberalism, even though shout out to Khalees because I love Khalees, but I don't like the neo-colonialism.
Thank you for that analysis. Kim's an expert, so we appreciate that little breakdown, tying the liberalism in there, her little individual, you can do whatever you want, you can live out your dreams on the continent. But as we see in the chat, as a Kenyan, I will say I was not consulted. So that was exactly what we're looking for, an example of how you actually achieve Pan-Africanism scientifically versus from a utopian standpoint. Now, one thing I want to add on this slide, and Dial, I think you're next up and let you cook, is we don't want to say, it's not completely fair, right, to compare a musician to a head of state. And so we don't want to just say that, oh, okay, well, because the response is, well, Khalees isn't the president, right? But we could compare Khalees to a Miriam Makeba, for example. Right.
Or a Chance the
White.
Rapper and
All
the
right.
Black Star Line.
Well,
That's
I'm
both.
gonna stick with Miriam Makeba first. I can't speak for the other examples. But that's what we want to remember as well. There are Pan-Africanists, scientific Pan-Africanists, who use their artistic talent, their resources, to develop Pan-Africanism. Right. Okay. So don't want to get lost in some of the inadequacies of the comparison.
All right. We're gonna bring it back to a bit more blurry lined analysis here. So obviously we have Dr. King, Dr. King's democratic socialism, which I guess in a way kind of gives some of this away, depending on what your approach is to socialism and understanding. And if you've been listening, then maybe you already kind of get the answer. And on the right, we have the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. So again, Dr. King, I want to emphasize, right? Like many of our martyred ancestors, many of them, and non-martyred ancestors, we really want to live into and understand that their life was always about transformation. And particularly in this, we're talking about the transformation of the politics, right? And so Dr. King's, in his youth, in 1955 compared to where he was in 1967, 1968, you can clearly see an evolution in his politics. But Dr. King's democratic socialism, here you go, buddy. Dr. King's democratic socialism, right? A quote, call it democracy, call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country and for God's children. He gave that speech at the Negro American Labor. He gave that quote comes from a speech, right, in 1961 at the Negro American Labor Council. Democratic socialism, very much distinct from communism as it works within So, right, and we know that democratic socialism works within the capitalist framework, right, where it really focuses on using democracy as a tool of to reform the economy, right? Democratic socialism is not really for the abolition of capitalism through revolution, but relies on democracy, quote unquote, to lead to an equal and egalitarian society. Democratic socialism in practice is wedded to liberal democracy, right? Now, to say if this is particularly, hold on, baby, hold on. Now to say, if this is again fully Dr. King's politics, that's up for debate for now. Another quote, I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. Capitalism started out with the noble and high motive, but like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing it revolted against. So today's capitalism has outlived its usefulness. I'm gonna just leave that there for y'all to interpret. Lastly, he said, capitalism forgets that life is social. And the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. Right. On the right, we have the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. The League I'm gonna just call it the League for short, officially guided itself by the principles of Marxism, Leninism, and Black liberation. Its leadership viewed the struggle of Black workers not merely as a fight for civil rights within existing systems, but as a central component of a broader struggle, right, to overthrow a broader class struggle, to be specific, to overthrow capitalism. They saw Black workers as being doubly oppressed, right, by class exploitation as workers and by national oppression as Black people, and therefore they saw themselves as a vanguard force for revolution. The League's constitution reflected this internationalist perspective, calling for the organization of Black workers everywhere against capitalism. Right. Again, these are some of their principles. Now, in practice, if you study a bit about them or watch the documentary, right, you will see that they raise tons of contradictions in their work. But ultimately, right, this is what the League stood for. So with that in mind, right, which one is utopian and which is scientific? See, we got a lot here in the chat already. Right, Philip said, how can capitalism start off with any nobility, or for the fact of saying it outlived its usefulness, when it was never useful beyond for the ruling class, right? Anybody want to come off? Anybody want to? There we go. Brother Timeless. Okay, let me get you going here. All right, Timeless, what's good? If you're talking, we can't hear you yet. Okay. Anybody else? Sorry, Timeless. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Let me try you one more time. See if I can get you off of mute, Timeless. Okay, we still can't hear you. I think Adonis, you came off. You can't. You raised your hand if you want to.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
All right. So I'm saying that the League is scientific simply because they called for a strike. Dr. King, like I said in the chat, his heart was in the right place and everything, and we know he was, talking that real talk about, being anti-capitalist and all of that. But like that's something that's important right now. That people was talking about calling for a general strike. So that's why I say that they are scientific. I know you said that there was a documentary where they contradicted themselves in their actions, but if we just talking about, solely the what was said, like the ideology, I would say they scientific. And thank you for all of this stuff that you've been posting, because I got a lot to Google. I'm gonna check out the documentary too.
Yeah, indeed. We did a screening last year, and it's available online for sure. I'm sure somebody already put it in the chat. But thank you for that. I will say, King was absolute, a lot of his organizing, whether with SCLC, Poor People's Campaign, a lot of it was about workers' rights. It was shrouded in civil rights, but a lot of it was also about workers' rights, and that's the years went on, particularly 1962 and onward. You can see his struggle, his engagement with the struggle around workers' rights started to intensify. He also did a lot. There's some hidden truth, some hidden history about Dr. King in Chicago, where he actually was meeting with organized gangs to actually engage in the struggle. He would meet with them. They actually did a day long or a 2-day conference, kind of a gathering, right, to kind of work through how to engage in struggle. And so again, before he had the opportunity to fully evolve, like a lot of our ancestors, because of the violence of the state, we don't know where he would have evolved to. But I think one of the things is clear about the League of Revolutionary Black Workers from the start, understood that if we can do a general strike, if we can shut down actually the auto industry, we can actually shut down this nation, right? Especially in the 60s and 70s, where the auto industry really drove the economy in the country, a big portion of it. And so, cool. So I'm gonna keep it moving. Okay, Lord.
Yeah, let's so this year, as Di pointed out, we have a study guide. And so what we want you all to do is study and practice, right? So feel free to share this, to go through it, and to play the game yourself. Take it to your organization. It's fun. Um, Try and build on it. Tell us what we might have missed. So we don't have time because we have to let Eugene cook, and we've been preheating for quite some time at this point. So another example you can use in the study guide, we have our discussion of the answers. But there's a great, case in this case of Sankara speaking in Harlem. Someone who's a Pan-Africanist and a socialist versus the status of Akon City in Senegal right now, a Wakanda-inspired city that was built to run on cryptocurrency. So these are the kinds of things you can use when you're trying to explain to people different strains of Pan-Africanism and the ones that are a little more scientific than others. Style, just keep scrolling through the slides so people get some examples.
Yeah.
Some other ones that we talked about, like this,
Yeah,
right
and
here.
and I can just say briefly, right? This is a bit more nuanced, right? And so you'll see in the study guide will be laid out. If you are obviously, if you're familiar with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, you know that this is the most significant Pan-Africanist organization in many ways for the last few decades that have really defined the intersection between Pan-Africanism and socialism, and Black liberation for African people around the world, but also being clearly anti-Zionist, anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist. And so, and again, somebody mentioned in the chat, right, whether it's the African socialism like Ujamaa, excuse me, or Leopold, the president and leader of the Negro Troop movement, where they were focused on African socialism and where they stated that African socialism is distinct mainly because Africa is a classless society. Therefore, class struggle is not the central element of our struggle, which is false. Which is, in many ways, actually irresponsible to say. And then there are other variety of contradictions that you'll see laid out. Dr. Umar Johnson, the Prince of Pan-Africanism, who says he is a descendant of Frederick Douglass, compared to Omowale and the Organization of African American Unity. Again, this is quite the dialectical conversation that can take place here between these two. And we can again raise many of the contradictions. One of the contradictions I mentioned, again from Frantz Fanon, is that national culture is not going back, even though, yes, the colonial empires have tried to shape and change the histories of African people through ethnography, photography, art exhibitions, histories, false disciplines, etc. One thing to be clear is that how we define ourselves is not just going back into the past and trying to live out our patriarchal dreams, but moving actually into the future of a liberated world where all of our people are free. And then we have this comparison, right, between Robert Owen and Fred Hampton. And again, I won't get into that. And then lastly, we have the differences between Jomo Kenyatta's Pan-Africanism in Kenya. With Jomo Kenyatta, Fred Hampton talked about Jomo Kenyatta, him being a neo-colonialist, right? Jomo Kenyatta spent too much time in Europe. And then ultimately right, he talked about Pan-Africanism and socialism, but he actually only focused on capitalist projects and his relationship to Europe. And then on the other side, we have Amy Ashwood Garvey, married to Marcus Garvey for just a few years before they divorced, not to be confused with Marcus Garvey's second marriage. But Amy Ashwood Garvey was quite the pioneer in a lot of ways, was involved in almost all of the congresses, but was a chair and an organizer for the fifth Pan-African Conference and Congress, I should say Congress, in which we demonstrated earlier the importance of that 1945 Congress in Manchester, excuse me. But she was pivotal in and fighting for women's engagement in the struggle. She also founded various organizations. She also lived in various continents as a Pan-Africanist. Um, so yes, so I'll pause there. And at this point, we want to bring in our comrade, Eugene Puryer, who is a longtime journalist and organizer, currently based in Baltimore, one of the blackest cities in the world. He was a founder of the anti-gentrification group Justice First, as well as the Jobs Not Jails Coalition, DC Ferguson Movement, Stop the Police Terror Project, DC. Um, our brother Eugene is the author of the book Shackled and Chained, Mass Incarceration in Capitalist America, and editor of the Black Belt Thesis, a reader. Currently, he works through Breakthrough News. If you don't follow Breakthrough News, you should definitely follow Breakthrough News, donate to Breakthrough News. It's rare that you can find independent, accurate, revolutionary news these days. He also is a member of the Central Committee of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Gang Gang. Our brother Eugene.
Peace, everybody. Am I here? Am I on? Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we good. You good?
Okay, yeah, perfect. Okay, peace, everybody. Listen, I appreciate everyone being here. I'm really happy that the MST got brought up earlier. João Pedro Tadele, who's one of the leaders of the MST, always says political education is more important than eating. I guess we can debate that 100%, but I just think it does speak to the value and the importance of being grounded in ideas. And we're in a battle of ideas, as we said at the beginning. Everyone has an ideology, no matter what they think. Let me drop an anecdote, and then I just want to hit a few points, that maybe speak to some of the arc of the experience of Black socialists and Black communists. I'll probably speak a little bit more to the U.S. context, but then tie it in different ways. But I just wanted to say, since we had the side-by-side of Lenin and W.B. Du Bois, that in 1913, Lenin wrote a text where he was talking about the importance of the struggle of oppressed nations against imperialism. And in that context, he's talking about a number of different places around the world, but he notes that the Black nation in the United States, that Black people in the United States should be deemed an oppressed nation. And interestingly enough, he had come to that conclusion based on reading statistics that came from the 1910 US Census. And the statistics on Black America in the 1910 US Census were gathered by W.B. Du Bois. So just sort of an amazing conversation, not a conversation, but sort of across oceans, across times, across spirits. And of course, Dr. Du Bois, as was discussed earlier, would later become a great partisan of the Soviet Union. So sort of an amazing arc there in many different ways. I think when we're thinking about the experience of Black people with communism, with socialism, I think there's one thing that we should also ground ourselves in, and I think that this whole class has led this to it, is that socialism and communism is foundational inside of the Black liberation movement. And not only is it foundational, but the Black interpretation of Marxist-Leninist theory, of socialist theory, of communist theory has been critical. I mean, one thing I often think about is, if you think about the United States, the most anti-communist country, the only communist that an average everyday person on the street could probably name are Black. I mean, I might be wrong about that. Maybe I'm underselling it, but Angela Davis, Assata Shakur, Amiri Baraka, Claudia Jones, I could go on and on. There are many fantastic communists of all nationalities in the history of the struggle here and around the world. But literally, I think the only popularly known, the entire Black Panther Party, we could go on and on. Fred Hampton was part of the Black Panther Party. These are names that people on the street might know. And I think that's a notable factor about how important the Black liberation movement has been, not just to Black people in and of itself in our fight for liberation, but to Paul Robeson, great point there in the chat, but quite frankly, the importance of the Black liberation movement to undergirding all movements for transformative change in the United States history, for sure. I mean, no doubt about that. And I think that's something that we have to recognize and that we have to claim. We're in the 100th anniversary of Black History Month. I think we need to claim that in a major way. It's the Black liberation movement that's led the way in many ways, but certainly in terms of leading the way in terms of communism and socialism in a mass movement there. So anyway, I mean, obviously there are many ideologies in the Black liberation movement, but nonetheless, I still think it's valuable and important to note that factor. I think there's a couple other points that I just want to make here in regards to this. And I think that some of what we've been discussing really led up to this in so many different ways. I mean, the fact that the existing system is the root of the oppression of African descended people around the world is pretty clear. And I think also the history of African descended people in our traditional cultures make the idea of communalism, of collectivism, of things that speak to a people first people first process, not a profit first process, which is what capitalism is, in contradistinction to socialism. Oh, somebody's trying to call me. Sorry. It makes sense that there would be some general feeling and purchase hold that these ideologies could have with our people because they correspond with our historical experience and also our knowledge that the current system does not work. But I think one thing I want to highlight here in the context of thinking about why I listed those names, and I could go on, and I could list more. Of course, CLR James, you could list so much of the entire African continent, which was, if you really look at the history of US imperialism over the 1960s and the 1970s, their fear of the rising African states adopting communist and socialist ideologies, the very fact that the possibility of communism coming to Southern Africa is why the United States switched its entire position, also Britain, on the issue of apartheid after the Angolan forces, along with Cubans, defeated the South Africans at Cuito Carnivale, and it seemed that they were going to sweep down and liberate Namibia, and then sweep down and liberate South Africa. And they already were trying to get rid of the Soviet Union, so the worst thing that they could possibly happen to them is for another Soviet Union to be formed in Southern Africa, because Mozambique, South Africa, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, these are all places that were led by radical socialist left-leaning movements. They were Pan-African movements. They were talking about the need of African countries to come together. So all of a sudden the US said, let's negotiate. And also the South African ruling class said, let's negotiate. So this fear and this power, I think, is an important factor we have to note. But why is it that so many of these countries and these movements and these people were able to dig in so deeply and did dig in so deeply to socialism and communism, not just as an ideology, but as a pathway forward to liberation? And I think it speaks very much to the impact of the Bolshevik Revolution and the deeper impact of what that means for our struggle against our own oppression and marginalization and dehumanization that has been impressed on us. The Bolshevik Revolution, which has a huge impact on oppressed people all over the world. Mao Zedong became a communist because of the Bolshevik Revolution. I could list many other people, but the point I'm making here is it shocked the world in many ways. And it shocked the world because the Tsarist empire was thousands of years old. I mean, it seemed like something that was not just going to fall. And more than that working class people and poor peasants who made the revolution could not only topple one of the most powerful, longest reigning monarchical dictatorships of all time, but take power into their own hands. And I think this is the important factor because it speaks to both the content and the method of a pathway to freedom. Because obviously you can think about a free society, and to go back to the point I made about how it's easier in our historical experience, I think, as Black people, to understand people first versus profit first is the way you want to live. Yes, the Bolshevik Revolution, but how do you actually get there and what does it actually mean? Well, first and foremost, you have to be able to take control of the state itself. That you can't be able to just transform society through a succession of mass movements, but people actually have to take power into their own hands and reshape the way society is structured and the way it's organized, right? I mean, we talk about constitutions and social compacts and all those things. I mean, really governing structures are just an agreement amongst ourselves about how we will live and move forward, right? Like that's what society really is. And so you can't just live on the basis of constantly mobilizing or constantly even organizing under the existing system. Eventually it has to lead to something, the capture of state power. And what the Soviet Union showed is that when working class and poor peasants captured state power, they could immediately take all of the resources that existed in society and to direct them towards their own needs. Like what does socialism basically say is that there's a certain amount of human and material resources that exist in society. And that very first and foremost, we're going to take those human and material resources and meet everyone's basic needs. Secondarily, we're going to think about what are the things that we want on top of the things that we need, and use all the human and material resources to create the things that we want through a broad democratic process of wants, not individuals just striving for the things that they get. And then what are the things that we wish we could have, but we can't get there yet? And how do we use all our human and material resources to plan to get those things at some point in the future? But without controlling what has traditionally been called the commanding heights of the economy, the big industries, agriculture, all the different things that make the world run, you're not going to be able to make those decisions in a way that are actually going to be notable. And why is that particularly important to African descended people? We have to think about the depths of our own oppression to understand why it's particularly important. You know, I have a friend, Ilyas Amari, who lives in Oakland, California, longtime struggler in the Eritrean movement. And he often says that the Chinese often say, you know, in 1949, they ended the 100 years of humiliation, but Africa has lived under 500 years of humiliation. You think of the tens of millions who were brought in who were taken away from Africa in the slave trade, 25% of whom estimated died there in the transatlantic passage. By the way, people don't talk about it, but 10 to 15% of people who were captured as slaves died on the forced marches from the interior to the coast, which should also be included in the numbers who have been, you know, brutally killed. And then also the impact on Africa of taking so many people away. I mean, you look at the impact of what's happened in the Caribbean, you look at the impact of what's happened in the US. I mean, I was doing some research on this the other day. You know, Black people are 2.4 times more likely than white people to die of stomach cancer. And honestly, it blew me away because I just thought like, wow. I mean, I'd never thought about it before, but if you just said like pick a fact out of air where maybe the disparities of the oppression of Black people is less relevant than others, I might pick stomach cancer out of air. But no, it's everything. Almost everything that's disproportionately bad is disproportionately Black and Indigenous. So when you think about the depths of our own oppression, and I don't have to tell people on this call how bad our people often have it. That's the reality of it. Then you have to think about the fact that how could we actually resolve those problems? Like, what is reparations and the idea of reparatory justice and all these other things? What does that actually mean unless we are able to actually direct the entire resources of society to address these things that have been built up over 500 years, not to mention the things that we want to see going forward? And so I think what you can see is that many of the organizations that start to emerge in the Black community leading the struggle right after the issue of the Bolshevik Revolution, the African Blood Brotherhood, and people like Cyril Briggs, at that time, A. Philip Randolph in the Messenger magazine, Hubert Harrison, who was also a great partisan of the Russian Revolution. This is what they're thinking about. I mean, it's not like I want to copy everything and do everything exactly the same, but that the basic fact was, in order for us to actually be able to move our people forward, we have to have preferential access to the means of production, the things that make society run. We have to have a broad democracy, a popular democracy, where we can actually have the ability to use those resources to address our own needs and to make that the top of the agenda of society. And on top of all of that, we have to have a framework by which we can get from point A to point B, which means we need to build a global coalition of individuals, organizations, and peoples who can fight against imperialism and are also oppressed against them. All the exploited and the oppressed of the world have to come together. So you can see in that context why I think, when I listed those names at the beginning, why so many people in our struggle and in our movement, whether on the continent, in the Caribbean, in North America, in other parts of the world, have all come to this conclusion that embracing socialism and communism and the broad socialist and communist world and mass movement as a lever for change is about not, wanting to just be following someone because these are, great figures or received wisdom, but because it was a recognizable pathway by which you could actually reach a form of freedom that was real and tangible and substantive, and not just, as they say in Africa, flag independence, or the equivalent of that in the United States, which might be the presidency of Barack Obama. Let me just make two more points and get out of here, because I know we gotta end at 9, and comrades are working hard and have a lot going on, and families and everything. The Black Belt Thesis Reader was mentioned. Folks can read the book, but I want to note it in particular because I think it's important to recognize the impact of the particular contributions that have been made by many Black communists to the broader sort of theoretical space. One of them being, of course, this idea of Black people as a nation within a nation. The idea that we are a people who were ripped from many different nations and many different polities and many different, great histories and traditions, and we're brought together as one people under the lash and under oppression, and because of our liberation movement to fight back. As the great Dr. Vincent Harding says in his book, There Is a River, is since the moment we hit the slave ships, we've been fighting back, and we've been, creating our own liberation movement, and that, of course, continues today. And the Black Belt thesis as a concept is something that's associated with Harry Haywood, who's a well-known Black communist. But I mentioned Cyril Briggs and the African Blood Brotherhood, who in 1919 also stated that there needed to be a Black state that was in the South. And I think a lot of what we talk about in the preface that I had the opportunity to write here, the introduction, is that, of course, this is an issue that has great resonance in many parts of the Black community and a lot of different elements and half-lives to it. Harry Haywood himself actually states that he came around to the concept of Black people as a nation by doing a deep study of the Garvey movement. Of course, there was the 49 state movement that also existed. So this is something that's deeply rooted in our own consciousness. But I think what the Black Belt thesis really was able to do was it was able to actually bring this into a broader sort of theoretical framework that was also a plan to action. I'll just read real quickly here from the introduction about the meaning of it. The Black Belt thesis solidified a particular communist contribution to the Black liberation movement, producing a unified understanding of the economic status, geographic distribution, and second-class citizenship of Black Americans. It named particular enemies, capitalists, and strategic allies, the working class of the Black liberation movement, and it prescribed the process, socialist revolution, by which Blacks could gain the practical ability to alter their subaltern circumstances, which is preferential access to the means of production, which I was mentioning. So I don't want to go too deep into it, but I just wanted to note the text. If you have the opportunity to pick it up at 1804 Books, I think it's rich, and always happy to hear people's criticisms as well if they read it and what they think about it. Final point I just want to make here is about the context of what some have called the Black Scare, Red Scare reality, and the deep relationship between the mechanism of repression by capitalist forces to the specific repression of the Black liberation movement. And I think it's relevant to the point that I was sort of making earlier as it regards the role of the Black liberation movement in United States history, and I'm speaking specifically about the US here to make a couple points, of being in many ways the tip of the spear of all transformative social movements in America. I mean, I often refer to the Black liberation movement of having a detonator effect. I mean, it shouldn't be lost on any of us that I think the two most quote unquote progressive periods in the United States, Reconstruction and the period of the Civil Rights Movement and immediate after that, those struggles were directly related to the struggle of the Black liberation movement and our struggle to be free. And I think the fact that capitalism and racism are so bound together, as Malcolm X said, you can't have capitalism without racism. When Black people start struggling, it raises a lot of questions about the society we live in, and it brings a lot in its wake. And I think that the capitalist class and the state that they've constructed understand that. And so even if you look at the rise of the national security state, and I'll note, by the way, that Reconstruction was maybe the first context of this. All of the hate against Reconstruction was that this is the US version of the Paris Commune, which we don't have a ton of time to get into, but the Paris Commune of 1871, where workers rose up and took over Paris, and maybe we're going to take over the whole country, and they had to massacre tens of thousands of them in order to put them down. Very radical movement. In fact, why do left-wing movements are always associated with the fist? Many people say it's because of the Paris Commune, because they had to bury people. Some of them they were burying alive in huge mass graves by the thousands, and people were fighting to get out. And so fists were punching up out of the dirt. And if you go to Paris today, there's a big cathedral, the Sacré-Cœur, that they put on top of the mass grave to show who really was in charge after they defeated them. But everyone said the Reconstruction is a communist plot. Agrarianism is what they used to call communism then, and that's what it was. But if you look at the construction of the national security state, it's notable that the Bureau of Investigation and many of the different elements that start to make up what we know now as the FBI, and subsequently later it would be the CIA and others. And at that time with the FBI, you also had the State Department, military intelligence, all sort of working together, that one of their biggest concerns was the Black liberation movement. They said that the most dangerous magazine in the country was the Messenger magazine, socialist, pro-Bolshevik, edited by Chandler Owens and A. Philip Randolph. Really the sort of growth of the movement of repression and other things like that comes from surveilling the African Blood Brotherhood, surveilling the UNIA. And what was one of their biggest fears was that these movements had deep international connections, especially between the United States, the Black struggle in the United States and India. They called it the Hindu Negro agitation, but it was one of their biggest concerns. Gandhi used to publish Marcus Garvey in Young India, his newspaper there in India. You had a lot of these connections, but this is one of the things they're constantly talking about. And why? Because their feeling was you had so many Caribbean radicals in New York, especially, not just Margaret Garvey, Cyril Briggs, of course, Hubert Harrison, Richard Moore, that were playing a key leadership role in the Black liberation movement. And then, of course, you have the relationship there then with the Indian liberation movement. And the fear of the United States and of the United Kingdom, and they were working together on this, was that Black people in the United States, Black people in the West Indies, and Indians could actually, if they united and waged their liberation movement, bring down the British Empire, because India was the jewel of the British Empire, along with many of the Caribbean islands, and also end Jim Crow in America, which from their point of view would be the end of elite capitalist rule in the United States. So you can see over time, the same thing is true in many different ways. COINTELPRO, of course, which becomes J. Edgar Hoover's second act. He starts really taking down the UNIA and Marcus Garvey. And then, of course, he moves on to say he wants to prevent the rise of the Black Messiah. It was because of the transformative reality that they knew they could happen, that Black people moving in and of themselves could move other people in ways that could shake the nation and shake the capitalist elites in ways that no one else actually could. So you had to destroy a Black Messiah because it was the Black Panthers, it was Malcolm X, it was Martin Luther King, it was SNCC, it was all these groups that inspired millions of people of all backgrounds to struggle in major ways. You had to take down the UNIA. You had to take down the African Blood Brotherhood. I mean, you think about the UNIA had most of its members in the Black Belt South. And when you actually read this, there's a good book called Grassroots Garveyism that if you get the chance to check it out. Because one of the number one activities of UNIA chapters in the South was military drilling. And many of them were strongest in these places where Reconstruction had been the most radical as well. So the impact of that and the fact that this was a movement that had a lot of contradictions, but was also in conversation with more radical organizations existing in Harlem in the time, and a lot of interesting beef and drama between all the different people and Marcus Garvey and Cyril Briggs and W.B. Du Bois. But the basic point here being is that they understood that there was a gumbo there that was coming together in a way that could be so powerful, it could actually wipe away something as powerful as the British Empire, something as powerful as the capitalist elites. And that has always been so deeply at the root. And I think it continues to be deeply at the root of the repressive systems that exist now. So I said a lot. I said it quick because, I definitely want to respect people's time here. I'm gonna be on the mass call next week, so maybe we can say more about it. If you find me on social media, I'll do the best I can. I'll be traveling the next week or so to try to answer questions. But I just want to say I appreciate Black Men Build. I appreciate everyone on this call. This is the type of political education we need to ground our organizing because it's serious, y'all. Like we're dealing with something as serious as the existence of our species on the planet with climate change. So if we don't get serious about our ideas, we're not going to do it. And from what I heard here tonight and what I saw in the chat, man, this is a great, sharp group of people. And I'm just excited to be struggling alongside you. Thank you so much.
We appreciate you. Definitely. Now we got some closing slides. We did start a little behind, so bear with us. If y'all have to go, of course, got to put the kids to bed, got to put yourself to bed. We don't mind. We did want to review some key takeaways. Again, this will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, YouTube at Black Men Build. So catch out this Theory Thursday, but also all the other Theory Thursdays. If you feel like this was a lot, go with a topic that interests you and work your way through. And of course, connect on the ground with us at Black Men Build, where we can help collectivize that study and it doesn't feel so lonely. So some key takeaways, and in the future, as we've said before, it's going to be more interactive. You all will be reading with us as well. But first and foremost, Pan-Africanism is a movement and ideology that demands the liberation and unification of Africa and the diaspora under scientific socialism. And let's illustrate that practice. Eugene or Dio, you guys want to take the other two?
Yeah, I'll do the next one. We can understand scientific socialism or Marxism, if you like, as a method of studying and investigating society and the natural world an economic system based on the collective production, distribution, and stewardship of our resources. And lastly, an ideology that produces an array of coordinated practical activities, movements, programs, and policies for class struggle.
And I'll hop on the last one. Socialism's components: worker-centered, people-centered, anti-imperialist, internationalist, dialectical materialist, in-goal communism, and says so with his chest. Communism, I got it. I should have done it a little harder. Political, economic, and social life organized according to the principle, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need.
Right on.
Appreciate it. Now there are endless struggles about how to get there, right? But we want to be clear on what we're fighting for with Black Men Build. So again, I know some people want to take some screenshots of these. They will be available on YouTube. You also have the study guide, so please dig back in whenever you want. But last year, we really centered on our values that you see at the beginning, and you got to see how that lived through our Theory Thursdays and Mass Calls. This year, we're talking about what we're fighting for, our platform, the 9 bars. And so if you take a look at these, first and into all U.S. wars, foreign and domestic, the freedom of all political prisoners, healthcare for free for everybody, free the land and the right to quality, secure housing for all, the full unionization and cooperative ownership of all workplaces, free education, reparations for people of African descent, healthy foods that are both affordable and accessible, science and technology by the people for the people. History isn't made, it's built. So join us at Black Men Build, or any organization that you have available to you fighting for freedom. We would love if you spent time with us. Now, one other thing is that each of these Theory Thursdays and Mass Calls will be based around one of these 9 bars. And so as you can see, next up will be an end to all U.S. wars, foreign and domestic. But before that, we have a mass call on the same exact topic. As you heard before, Eugene will be joining us this next week, February 26th. Same time, same place on Black History Month.
Indeed.
And we'll be here, but we'll also be joined by Dr. Layla Brown of the All African People's Revolutionary Party and Dr. Sundiata Chajuwa, a legendary Black scholar and somebody who informs our practice to this day. So with that being said, I will let you all go. Thanks for sticking around. We'd like to go ahead, Don.
Yeah, before that.
Yeah, I know.
The very last things, but we do have some additional resources, of course. Again, as Lord said, this will be on YouTube. You can take a screenshot of this. This is just a snapshot of additional resources. On here, Walter Rodney's entire catalog can be added. Anything from Claudia. I mean, we can go on and on, right? This is just a starting place. This is just a starting place. So just to say that, what I want to add is a few things. So to continue to make our work scientific, we need data. We need information. So a survey is put it in the chat. I know people don't want to do surveys. I'd be like, please do that shit. Like, it is vital. You know what I'm saying? It's not just for funders and this and that. Like, if we want to be guided by our people, we need to know. We need feedback. And again, part of our work to being scientific, a part of being scientific is actually having the data that says, what did you like, what you didn't like. We can see what our metrics are so we can be tighter, so on and so forth. So along with the resources we have shared, please fill out the survey now, because you won't do it later. We know that because we're scientific and we know that people ain't gonna do it tomorrow. So do it today, do it right now. It'll take you literally 30 seconds, right? And so please give us that information. So I just want to say that. Lastly, the study guide is already mentioned. We will have study guides every month that accompany Theory Thursday. And then the last things, right? As a good organizer, there always is an ask, right? So the survey is the first ask. The second one is sign. If you haven't signed the values pledge, please do so, right? It shows that you have a commitment to our basic foundation of our principles, our values. It also allows for us to be able to email you, send you text messages, keep you up to date on what's happening, what's going on. We will post about Mass Call tomorrow, so you'll be able to sign up. So please, when you see it, share it, repost it, send it to a comrade, send it to a friend, a colleague, become a member. There is a process that we are a membership-based organization. So become a member and make a donation. Becoming a member is also it also includes a recurring donation up to about $9 a month for part of your membership. We talked about being wanting to be the best organization we can be. To do that, we need economic independence. Not to be, and as far as self-determination, we're not talking about the wrong type of economics.
Generational wealth, brother.
Yeah. We're not talking about that part, but we are talking about free to land. We are talking about New Africa. We are talking about Pan-Africa. We are talking about et cetera, within that legacy, that genealogy, what people call the Black radical tradition. And so these things are key for us. Sign a pledge, become a member. If you're in the hub area, whether you are in Miami, Columbus, New York, Detroit, St. Louis, North Carolina, Atlanta, tap in with a hub. We have Circle Cities. If you're in Chicago, if you're in Baltimore, if you're in Orlando, tap in with us. And so what you learn here, you can actually implement with the organization like ours or another radical or revolutionary organization or a party, right? So I want to throw that out there as well. So with that being said, peace to you if you're willing to fight for it. In the words of our late great ancestor, Fred Hampton. And then until next time, much love. Peace to the nines. Thank you, Eugene, again. So brilliant. Looking forward to continuing the conversation next week. And
Peace,
thank you all
everybody.
for joining us. Mhm.
Peace, y'all. This is great. Now you got the recording? You muted if you're talking.
Oh yeah. This is a good start. We're gonna cook this year, y'all. Like we always, but we definitely gonna cook.
Yeah.
Peace, y'all.